all. Thank you very much for joining us. I am Karen Motzo. I am the Professional Development Director at Demonstrated Success. And we have been doing tons of work with Merrimack this year, and it has been utterly lovely. And we have learned from them, and I hope that they have learned from us. And we decided to collaborate a little and share this very creative solution to this very challenging year. And so I guess I'll just introduce John Fabrizio, who is the Assistant Superintendent in Merrimack. And as soon as he starts talking, you'll know it's him. He's the box with the big American flag. And it says his name. So I'm going to hand it off and I will moderate any questions. You guys should feel free to write into the chat, but you can also, you really can also unmute yourselves. There's not so many people on that you can't. Yeah, and if that becomes a problem, we'll do it differently. All right, but I'll start out and John can introduce everybody. Thank you to the Merrimack staff for sharing your adventures with us this year.
Thank you, Karen. And, we've had a long-standing relationship with Demonstrated Success over many years. And when you get into these situations like a pandemic, which I've never really been in before, so we're learning, it's good to rely on your friends and your partners. And I think this is an example of how we've done that and really come together to present today, but to also kind of open it up. Because if there is questions about kind of the how and the why, we'll do our best. This is our story. It's not a perfect story by any means, but it's our story about kind of how we got into a bifurcated remote system. So Fern, So, of course, I'm John Fabrizio, Assistant Superintendent, and everyone else, please introduce yourself. Bill, we'll start with you.
Bill Morris, coordinator of the RAIL program.
Heather
Barker, Director of Student Services.
Nancy
Director of Technology and Media Services.
And we're all going to echo. Fern.
I'm Fern Seiden. I'm the System of Care and Learning Supports Coordinator.
Thank you. If everyone could mute, it might help.
Yeah, I think we better.
Okay. Thank you. Oh, I'm echoing. It's me. Sorry. So planning for change. It's important when we think about how did we get there. It took a lot of planning. We put together a plan of really how do we tackle, we're in a pandemic, what do we do? And we brought together about 215 educators over the summer to really look at our reopening plan. How do we do that? And there's a few steps that had to happen in there. And we did some brainstorming about what can we do to meet the needs of families that are out there that may need some different tools than they've had before and need some special care because of this traumatic experience we're all going through. So it got into, when we started our planning, it's like technology. Do we have equity? Can people access what they need to access? Can we get what we need to get for both those kids that are remote and those coming into the building? What do we do with our technology? Where does it go? Does it go home or does it stay in the school? And all those questions we had to answer. And I'm going to lend to Nancy Rose a little bit to talk about kind of how she had the fastest car in Merrimack and how she helped out all those families. And we'll let her talk about that. And then it's meeting the needs of exceptional learners. And it really was Heather and her team and our partnership that led us to really making some decisions about how do we meet all the needs of all of our learners and be clear and concise about what we're trying to teach and learn. And then the family and staff and emotional support, that's where our partnerships with Fern came in and talking about that. So it really was like, how do we support all of our families through this very traumatic experience? So who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. George Orwell. This quote's on my wall actually, and it's kind of really where we went from. We looked back, then we looked forward. So how do we address the bifurcated system? What do? We have to look at this. Community feedback was our first. We got a lot of feedback from our community through surveying and finding out what are their needs and how do we meet them. We found out through that we need to offer choice. There has to be a lot of choice. Those 220 educators really worked on, okay, how do we offer choice? How do we have safety protocols within our building, but also look to taking care of the safety and well-being of students out in our community who may never step foot in our buildings. So that's where we really created, from conversations with our leadership team, the REAL Academy. And what REAL stands for is Remote Education Academy for Learning. And it was an opportunity to say, we needed someone to oversee this. It wasn't going to happen that we had half our population in school, some at home, and then a third system of some that never come in a remote thing, in a remote atmosphere. How do we have that remote atmosphere have the attention it needs? So we approached Bill Morris, who you'll hear from in a little bit, about our REAL Academy, and offer Bill a new opportunity in district that will hopefully sustain for a long time. And then we had to really communicate what this meant for families and what this meant for families in their choices they were making. Karen? So we had to develop an instructional model that was clear. We looked at essential learning competencies, and we developed these across all curriculum areas and in all departments, really about what are kids known and expected to do. And we had to do that. We had to have goals. We had to have engaging lesson design. We had to have good formative assessment. And then consistency of practice. We had to teach similarly so kids could come in and out of both systems. If we were so different, it wouldn't work. We had to be the same in our teaching practices. So it was a lot of professional development about how do you teach remotely? How do you teach in a bifurcated system? How do you teach some kids in your building and then create opportunities for them to learn individually? And we did all that work, which takes districts about 5 years, in about 2 months. So that was really a lot of work to get people together and work with 220 educators to make this happen in a year. So, Fern. So, perseverance, number one, we had to persevere. We had to say, okay, we can sit back and freeze and say, oh goodness, a pandemic, it's COVID. What do we do? And freeze, or we could persevere and move on, understanding that pandemic's in front of us all the time, but we have to find ways to educate our students. Innovate, we had to innovate. By creating the REAL program, it was innovative to have one kind of a school within a school that was overseen by an administrator to have the care and well-being of doing it. We needed a lot of teamwork and a lot of commitment from our leaders and from our educators. The Merrimack educators through this, I cannot say enough positive things about the willingness to change, the willingness to adapt, the willingness to try. And you don't get that everywhere. So I think that we've had our hard times and we've had our good times, but it's one of those times where we've still had times together. And I think that we continue to do that and we commit together. To Bill.
Yeah, so well, so first I'd just like to say that I am so appreciative of some of my REAL peeps being here today. So if you are part of the REAL program, could you just do a thumbs up, please? Awesome, look at that. Talk about dedication. So John and Dr. McLaughlin, the superintendent, came and said, Bill, we have an opportunity that's just it's too good to say no, right? And I love that they had this vision of this is about today and this is about the future. And so they proposed this REAL Academy, and we had to begin because it was something that hadn't existed before. And so the first thing was really having a job description created, a program description, vetting that with the district leadership team, vetting that with the school board. And once that was set, then we took the show on the road. We met with all the remote teachers, and we explained the program. We explained the position, how the program could be of support to them. And we did the same with support staff as well. And then we also went and visited families in a weekly parent meeting that Heather Barker hosts, so we could share with them as well. One of the things that's important to me, it has been in my 20-year career as an administrator, is that idea of culture and building a positive culture. And so this was a new opportunity to do that virtually. And so some of the things that we did to do that was we established bi-weekly meetings with each school group that was remote, established bi-weekly meetings with each support staff. In those meetings with the support staff, we had Heather Barker, the Director of Student Services for Untitled, came, and we just, and the most important part of these meetings was really just listening, giving people a voice, letting them talk about their frustrations, what was working well, what wasn't, when needed, acting as a liaison for these groups. Other things that had to do with culture, we set up a weekly, we called it the Real Cafe. Remote staff could come, just connect. One of the things we found was, people, feeling isolated. And so that was a great way to do that. The remote, the Real program, we sponsored a district-wide Veterans Day assembly with virtual speakers and music, and that was a great way to get the program introduced to the community. And then another piece of what we did was we established a Real UDL team with remote educators from across the district, and so we have that group that's looking at barriers across across remote instruction, how to remove them, and just that idea of people talking across the district. And then some of the things that we did to support families, we often will, in my role, I will facilitate meetings with school staff and families. We're going to be starting a book club for remote families, up to 25 parents, to read a book together, distance learning playbook for parents. And so, and then just regular communication, written and that sent out in meetings with the families, some of the ways. And then staff, we've provided a good amount of professional development, beyond the regular opportunities to professionally dialogue. We partnered with Demonstrated Success for webinars targeted to the needs of teachers. We did the same for parents, and we also have had internal trainings. Fernsiden has provided some. We've had other people come in to do them around math and literacy. We also have multiple book studies happening with remote staff. There's a book, distance learning playbook for educators. And so we have this simultaneous book clubs happening, one for parents, one for educators, which is pretty neat. We also have done technology training. We pushed out best practice articles and readings and information about webinars. We brought in consultants like Polly Bath, who is a consultant around social emotional learning, as well as Bill Wilmot, who is with CAST in UDL. So those are some of the ways that we have provided professional development for educators, and so so Fern, if you want to move on to the next slide. So so what's really important is to collect data, and sometimes it's quantitative, sometimes it's qualitative. I have a preference of qualitative data. I love to hear people's stories, what their experiences are. And so some of our real educators, when we collected data, some of the things they talked about, being able to actually learn to Zoom and teach through it, being able to transition through things like the ladybug, using a ladybug, videos, chat, and you know, like this person had said, an occasional lame pun. So a little bit of humor there. You sort of have to have that humor is just so important. You know, and you know, it's not perfect, and you know, and like someone says here, a barrier I have is feeling disconnected from others, forgotten, and the teachers in this group have been a great source of support. And so what we hear from the remote educators is they feel most kind of supported from fellow remote educators, and so that bi-weekly meeting is important, and that makes sense because you know, no one understands you like somebody else walking in your shoes. And so, friend, if you and so, and how about for parents? What do we hear from parents? One parent, he gets excited to go on Zoom for meetings. It's wonderful seeing him so excited for school, even if it's not in the building. I can't wait to see how far he comes by the end of the school year. A second one, as much as it's hard, things have gotten better, and I feel like it is a work in progress. It's one day at a time. And so what we've learned is that many children have met with great success learning remotely. And so what we've learned is that for some children, they are meeting with more success than in person. Not all, and it's not for all, but just having that opportunity for choice, I think families really have really appreciated that. So I'm partial to space, and I keep telling the remote teachers, the real teachers, that we're like Star Trek, boldly going where no educators gone before. We're pioneers, we're like astronauts, because no one's done this before, and so everyone is learning together, and so so we have like keeping it real, and so what we want to do and what the vision of the district is to provide remote students a comparable quality education to those who are learning within the walls of the school building. And what we have learned since the spring is that we must think outside the box, be willing to consider options and meet families where they are at. And so thank you. And now I believe Nancy's going to share.
Thanks. Sorry. So we had kind of an interesting perfect storm that converged, that coincided with the pandemic, because we knew during the last school year that we were in need of replacement of our learning management system. And we were also seeking broader adoption, because one of the things we'd heard from families was that having many different places to go get things was a problem. And so we decided to turn the selection and implementation of a learning management system into one aspect of our big planning initiative over the course of the summer. So that was one of many of the teams that worked over the summer. What kind of was interesting as well is that we looked at least 5 different systems. We had criteria that we were working against and a wish list, and we were looking from grades K through 12. And it just so happened that as we were arriving at a decision and leaning towards Canvas, the state DOE was working on a license to provide Canvas for all of the schools in the state as part of a partnership with the university system, the New Hampshire university system. And so we made a selection and happened to land within that big project, which kind of also was sort of like a final decision point, because as more and more districts adopt Canvas, we have a bigger community of people learning how to use the system. But nearly all of the teachers have adopted Canvas as learning management and as a way to communicate with families, which, when you consider every other thing that we've been up against in the last 6 months, it's a minor miracle, I think, that it's happened. And I think it's been, I'll touch a little bit on training in a little bit, but a huge part of this was buy-in from the top level of leadership into the district adopting this system and that driving that change. So that was one of the aspects of technology to support all learners, but especially remote learners, whether they were part of the Real Academy or as students went out on quarantine or when we went into fully remote learning between Thanksgiving and MLK Day. The other, one of the other big things that we were grappling with was devices. We are not a one-to-one district. We have carts of iPads, Chromebooks, and Windows laptops all over. We were about 3 students to a device, kind of across the district, depending on what school or what department. So I think we found out, I can't remember the time frame when it was in March in the spring pivot to remote learning, but we had essentially 2 or 3 days to prepare all of those different devices to walk out of the building in the hands of kids. And we weren't set up for the policy part of that, the support part of that. We had to do some re-imaging. We converted a bunch of our Windows laptops over to Chrome so that they worked a little bit more easily. And so we handed out about 900 devices the first couple of weeks in March. And that was a true reflection on how dedicated our staff are, because we were able to sort of say, here's what we need to do. These are the devices we have. We set up a process to manage it. The library staff and the technology staff and all the schools collaborated. We used Microsoft 365 Teams to talk to each other constantly. And we used the library system to check the items out to the students. And we knew we were going to run low on devices. I put an order in, and in April, the day that they closed the buildings to staff, our shipment of 200 Chromebooks arrived, and we were getting them ready. We had an assembly line growing in one of the art rooms in the high school, and we were able to still get about 70 of them out. And then from there, once the buildings closed, then I started handing Chromebooks out from the trunk of my car in the upper elementary parking lot. And we still used our system. We still had support going, but we just kind of kept working to meet the needs of families. We started out with an agreement that every family would get 1 device. And then as soon as we met that need, we were able to prioritize the students that we, well, at this point, this was before Real was started. This was in the spring, because once we got 1 device up, then we started working on additional devices for families with multiple students. And then we ordered more devices. We were able to get some refurbished ones over the course of the summer. And then as we went into the fall, we brought things back. We did another device lend out, 1 per household, but we prioritized the remote learners at that point because that was going to be their ticket to having access to curriculum. They were not going to be in school. And then we did the same thing. We gave out additional devices. We got our hands on about 200 refurbished Chromebooks. I put in an order, 2 orders for about 500 Chromebooks. We were able to leverage Title IV money and also some of the COVID money. And those arrived about 2 weeks ago. So the orders were placed in July and we just got them, which gives you a sense of how much of what we were grappling with was just simply out of our control. So that's devices. And then another big area that we put a tremendous amount of planning effort and different alternate funds like the Title IV, Title II, and the COVID funds was different digital learning tools. Because what we were finding is with instruction in person or packets, there's things that you can achieve that would be done more elegantly or efficiently or consistently if we were actually using different online platforms. And so we had meetings with the language arts coordinators, math facilitators, and the different planning groups that were involved in getting us ready to go for the fall. So we licensed a system for the high school English language arts program, Actively Learn. We licensed No Red Ink as a writing program for the middle and high. Newsella for the middle, the Pioneer Valley Digital Footprints and the kits to go with that for the K-6 schools, Words Their Way for the upper elementary. We invested in a more robust social studies or science. It was a science textbook that was online that we didn't have access to prior. And then we more recently have licensed IXL. And because we did K through 8, grades K through 8 completely for English, language arts, and math, they threw in social studies and science. So we're just now learning how we might employ that to help with 4 days of instruction at the elementary schools, or 4.5 days, but then also the 4 days of instruction in grades 5 through 12, where we are going to have students present, whether they're physically in the building or not in the building. And so there's going to be a management need for educators. And so that's one of the new ones that's on the way there. So just a lot of investment. We also invested in some library tools to make greater use of the licensed content that we do for research. One of those is the Gale in Context for Educators, which allows an educator to kind of pull together a module of materials from good databases so that they can work with those things without having to go out and search all the different databases. Then another area that we've been investing in is infrastructure. This was an opportunity to take advantage of funding, and we were able to upgrade the wireless throughout the entire district and also some cabling. And it was an opportunity to use funds that sort of arrived on our doorstep and had to be used in a short amount of time. But what we weren't probably anticipating was that when we went to fully remote learning from November through mid-January, teachers didn't necessarily all have the technology they needed at home. And so they were coming into the schools to do instruction for remote kids. So we had the wireless in place to support the bandwidth needed for all of that Zooming. And then we also used some technology tools in preparation, or I'm sorry, technology funding in preparation for semester 2 to invest in a higher quality camera that allows to show part of the classroom. You can set up different points on the classroom. It's a video 360 camera, as well as a Zoom functionality, so that there's just a higher quality of video capability for the different classrooms. And so we're just now getting those deployed and learning how to use those and what those can bring to the lessons. And then finally, and it's not last because it's least, but we have invested a tremendous amount of effort in training. We did a lot of training for Canvas and the rollout of Canvas. A big thing that we did was on the 2nd of November, we had an all-day in-service day, and we had a universally designed day of Canvas learning. We had all grade levels. We had people who were in person and not in person. So we had some videos that we pre-selected. We had live sessions that we ran. We also partnered with iLearn New Hampshire staff, who are responsible for the deployment of Canvas K-20. And then we also then just had time for collaboration so that people could just work, and they could work with each other or on their own, but they had time to invest in working on their site. So that was a very helpful day. And we got a lot of feedback that that open structure and the ability for teachers to have control over how they use their time was really highly, highly valued. And then since then, as we were really pushing to get Canvas adopted by everybody, one of the other things we did over the summer was rearrange our digital learning specialist roles at the K through 6 level. They have always been full-time teachers, and they were not available to support educators who were needing support as we were moving forward with more tools, or to support families who were relying on online systems for their students' education. So we changed the arrangement so our digital learning specialist would teach direct instruction for grades kindergarten and 1, and then the library media specialist, who had always been flexibly scheduled, were shifted into teaching grades 2, 3, and 4 research skills. And then in the upper elementary, they adjusted their special schedule so that the digital learning specialist there was freed up to do direct support. So she does a lot of push into classes, and she's with students a lot, but it's not on a schedule. So she's in classes with students in support of teachers or with teachers. And I think that, along with, I licensed Calendly, the self-scheduling software, for that group to be able to allow people to self-select time one-on-one with the digital learning specialists or coordinators, or at the high school, the librarian, to just get direct hand-holding, to have templates sent over. In many cases, the best way to get somebody to work was to set them up and then show them how to edit, rather than try to get them over the hurdle of starting with a blank page and try to riddle all that out. So that's kind of a lot of the things that we did were in support of all educators, but the focus was really on recognizing what role technology would play in support of our in-person, our remote learners, which was everybody in the spring. And then when we came back, we had the hybrid learners and the fully remote learners. And then we were all remote for a while. And now we're coming back, we're going to have K through 4 or pre-K through 4 in full time and remote. And then grades 5 through 12 will have either fully remote or concurrent learners. So we've worked to just flex and pivot and adjust to what has been going on with the program changes in the district. The other thing we did was we set up a generic support system for technology, just support at SAU 26, so that people didn't have to stop and think too much about where do I get help for this problem. So everything goes into that same ticketing system, and then my tech staff and library staff filter out and move things around to where they need to go. Because tech support is constant and it is coming from all directions. So that's all that I have for now.
Okay, so as you heard earlier, John worked with all of us across the district, the superintendent's office, to create teams during the summer to plan for the reopening of school. So our task, once we knew what the schedules were going to be, once we knew that we were going to have a fully remote platform and we were going to have a hybrid platform in Merrimack, we then began a special ed team working with our buildings, BLTs, principals, coordinators, gen ed teachers, special ed teachers, and all of our support staff who do the bulk of that day-to-day work. We began to work around how were we going to design the schedules. So we created a tiered approach. We looked at tier 1. The very first thing is all students are general ed students. So our exceptional students, we wanted to ensure that they had access to the general education. And in the case of the fully remote platform, that is when you first think about special education and remote education, they don't seem like they go together, because our historic experience in special education is that we push in a level of support, human beings in close contact with kids in smaller and smaller groups, supporting them. And in this platform, children and the support for them were in completely different spaces, and we're not in the same space, and they were in these sort of two-dimensional worlds with a screen between them. So our first step was thinking about the general education. You've heard John talk about it and Nancy talk about the tech support for it. Our task was, how were we going to support that general education? So when students were accessing what was happening in the general ed classroom, we'd be pushing in, how would we push in paraeducator support? How would we help the team adapt the instruction or modify the curriculum or look at the universal design components of assessment, curriculum, and instruction? So that was the first tier. So we had the entire team in special ed and general ed work on how are we going to do that piece and build that piece of infrastructure. The second tier, we looked at special education. How were we going to help the special education teachers, related staff providers, and the support staff, along with families, because now families are your partners. The children are in the home or in a caregiver's setting, whether that's a child care setting or a YMCA or school, some other type of school setting. They become your partners now in terms of the pathway into the learning and the exit out of the learning to demonstrate mastery. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how would we develop those instructional plans and schedules once we knew what the overall schedule was going to be, which was initially for real, it was just like hybrid, 2 days of live instruction in the real academy, that would be remotely for these students. And then they would have IPD days, independent practice days, and Friday was a flex day where educators were planning, working with each other. These teams, special ed teams, were convening, creating pathways, as we said, to learning and out of the learning. And then on the opposite days, you did the same thing in the hybrid. So all students had some level of remote, but in terms of real, how were we going to push in that level of support for specialized instruction, for additional services and supports, as well as those therapies, right? And when you think about that with tier 1, the first thing is you build the schedule around what are the classes students are going to be attending with their general education peers, And then where do you build in the supports and the special ed therapies and those Zooms? So one of the things I remind people of often is when we're talking about students with educational needs and special education, those kids are in fact having more of these Zooms, more of this time in intensive visual settings that they weren't used to before, beyond what a typical student would have. So that's just something that became very apparent in the late summer and early fall with feedback from families. Some families were reporting their child was in 30 to 35, 40 Zooms a week, trying to make sure they were getting the special education, getting sessions with their paraeducators, pre-teaching, reteaching, right? General education support, general ed classrooms, and then therapies. So there's been a lot of tailoring, fine tuning, right? And as Nancy said, flexing and pivoting. The third tier was thinking about when we look at access to special education that can't be fully delivered using that remote platform, or it just wasn't working as well as families or the therapists and providers felt. We convened those special ed teams and talked about, was there a different pathway? Could we create a clinic type setting in our school buildings where students could come into a very safe setting, like if you went to the dentist during this time or a doctor, you'd wait in the car, you'd be called in, you'd have your therapy and you'd go home. You would not access lots of students, you wouldn't be moving around in the building. And we were able to do that with some families. Additionally, we purchased some online platforms to do remote therapies and a remote assessment to make it more interactive. And then finally, we decided if we could not do it live in the remote or live in person, then we would comp edit later. So we'd offer a promissory note and give it to parents later. And then finally, the last tier, tier 4, was how do we support our parents as partners who are now suddenly embroiled in how to educate their child in their home when people are trying to schedule Zooms and do therapies and all those pieces. So those were how we focused in our planning for this work. Fern, thank you. So the team across Merrimack, we looked at every individual kid. We did not look at creating programming that we were going to have our students fit in. We looked at each of the students. So tier 1, the focus was on designing, adapting, and modifying those remote learning opportunities for students. We used the planful use and integration of paraeducators, and I see some in this Zoom with us today who have been excellent supporters of students. The use of the universal platform Canvas, which offered a single entry point for all aspects of education. That was huge for us coming into the fall, because what we learned from March to June is for families who had students on IEPs, they were moving across tons of different platforms, trying to figure it all out to get kids in and out of the different sessions. So having a one-stop entry point was critical, and Nancy did a great job getting that in place for us. And then we worked with Nancy's team to make sure that we had the technology in the homes for students and in the hands of, for example, the paraeducators or the special educators who also may have been remote at this point coming into the fall in the Real Academy, so that they had what they needed to be able to do the services for general ed. In tier 2, access to special ed, we delivered our specialized instruction supports and related services through a combination, in the case of remote, fully remote, or where we had to, we found pathways to learning for kids or put it off. We also purchased Presence Learning as a platform for our speech and language folks, for our special ed teachers, for our school counselors and other helpers, behavior intervention specialists in our schools, so that they would have a platform that had a huge database, because that was one of the big challenges from March to June, is just the labor intensity of creating learning experiences or opportunities or engaging children in this platform. We purchased Goalbook for, I purchased 70 licenses actually, so that people had this giant database of all kinds of things, from SEL to transition to guidance to reading, writing, speech and language, OT, you name it, it's all in there. So we did that. Additionally, we purchased through Presence Learning school psychology evaluations for our remote students. So if they could not come in and there was no way to bring them in for evaluation, and they were either referred for an initial eval in special education or a triennial, we worked with our special ed team to develop our skill set around administering remote evaluations with presence learning. Additionally, we had Goalbook in the past, but we purchased Goalbook for every one of our special education teachers across the district so that they had the opportunity to have that giant database, because inside of Goalbook, it doesn't just develop IEP goals and objectives. It has a gigantic library of activities and lessons that go along with the goal areas in special education. And additionally, the thing I was really looking for was the progress monitoring tools, because what we learned from March to June was it was very hard in the remote platform to progress monitor. So we purchased Goalbook so that we had the opportunity that people had at their fingertips in the remote world or in the hybrid world when kids were remote, the ability to progress monitor students and use quick tools so that people could on a weekly basis be monitoring how students were doing. Tier 3, if we couldn't, and we talked about this before, we used that combination of trying to bring kids into therapeutic settings that were isolated so that kids were not exposed. That worked for lots of kids. That wasn't just for school psych, but we additionally have some students who are in our remote school in Real who come in, for example, for PT, or who come in for one speech and language a week and they do the rest remote, or whatever, the combination that the special ed team organizes together. Additionally, we did do the reverse. We identified students who could not benefit, who had to be in the remote learning community, from being in that remote learning community and access Zoom on their own or leave it to their parents to do that. So we pushed in home services. We contracted with Constellations and put RBTs and ABAs and BCBAs in homes to help families with the home environment, create structure, routines, help students and families, help students get onto the Zoom and participate. And that has been really very effective for those families. And finally, again, if we couldn't do it, and we can't still do it, we'll offer that comp ed later. Fern, thank you. The final tier had to do with parent engagement, and that really has to do with parents as our partners. So in July, when the school board announced that they were moving to this dual model of fully remote or a hybrid model, and then all these subsequent pivots that we've had since fall, the parent community, I hosted a parent conversation in July because I had heard some parents had reached out to me and said parents were really concerned. They didn't know what was going to happen. They didn't understand what this all meant in terms of remote and hybrid for their children. So I began to host weekly parent Zooms, and it was an open forum. Any parent could come, they could express their concerns, they could ask questions, they could advocate, whatever it was that they needed. And we used that platform. It's still in place and it's very robust at this point. But that was the beginning of that, and it offered parents voice, the ability to advocate and actually participate in what was happening in the district, because on a weekly basis, I bring information back to our leadership team on Wednesdays and share sort of the flavor of what parents are thinking, are concerned about, great ideas they have. I mean, they are a remarkable partnership. And additionally, offering professional learning to parents as partners with us. So we have a parent advisory board for special education that meets with me monthly, and we identify things together and they let me know what's going on in the different buildings, and there's representation for each school. We have a partnership with the Parent Partnership for Universal Learning, and they have social media platforms. So they've become very adept at using Facebook as a way for us to poll parents about things they'd like in terms of upcoming learning opportunities. We have offered all kinds of things, webinars, visits, all kinds of things through that, and then all kinds of other ways that parents can connect with each other, because this came up, as Bill mentioned, educators feel isolated in this remote world, so do families and students. So this was a way for them to socially engage. So we've partnered with them. As I said, we have those weekly parent Zooms. And then I recently began office hours. Each week I offer a 3-hour chunk of time where I might be working at my desk, but the phone lines are open for any family to reach out and talk to me, and they know that's time allocated to them. We developed a vision and a mission statement with the parent groups. So I mean, Fern had suggested I share it with you. The mission of the partnership between Merrimack School District and the Partnership for Universal Learning Parent Group is to educate, support, and empower Merrimack's diverse families of exceptional children and youth. And our vision is for all families to have the confidence, knowledge, and understanding they need to effectively advocate for their children and to partner with professionals to ensure that children and youth grow and learn to their full potential. So this really is the foundation for the work we're doing with our remote parents in the community. Thanks, Fern. Those parent coffees that I talked about that started as a way to give parents information way back in early July, we host a 2-hour Zoom every single Tuesday from 1 to 3 p.m. And it is, as I said, an open dialogue. Anything goes as long as people are polite and respectful to one another. Our regular guests have included, and this is pretty powerful because when you think about parents having access to the folks that I'm going to mention, they have regular access and are able to offer their voice, their input, share concerns, participate in our school district. Mark McLaughlin, the superintendent, joins us. Bill Morris from Real is a regular visitor. John Fabrizio, he joins us to talk about curriculum instruction assessment, report cards, what's coming up. We have partnered with PIC. Maureen Shields has come and she's done 3 parent presentations, including some evening events that we're hosting now. Fern Seiden, our coordinator of care and learning supports, is with me every week. Polly Bath, who has been a long-standing consultant to Merrimack, comes on a monthly basis to answer any questions. It's an open forum that parents have around SEL and behavioral supports. Peg Dawson has come and begun to join us around executive functioning with families and just answering their questions, offering advice, talking to them. Jess Thompson from Constellations is a regular visitor offering BCBA and ABA support for families in home environments and answering questions and offering follow-up information that goes on the website for all families. So anything we do at the Parent Coffee, we share on the Facebook page so families and parents who can't come can see it. Additionally, Lou Miller and her PT associates are also regular visitors now because parents said, hey, our kids are inactive at home. They're sitting a lot. So we started having Lou and her team come and share ideas for how to get your kids up and moving during the remote learning time and in that remote learning environment. And Dr. Walrath has partnered with Fern. He works with us as a school psychologist, and he's been working with families on coming just in coffee time and also offering webinars on anxiety, stress, and then how do we support students, staff, and families in these difficult times. All of these topics came from parents asking as groups, like, this is what we need. So this is the power of offering parent voice and partnering with them in our remote community. And I have to say, it's been a remarkable partnership with Fern and with Bill and with Nancy and with John, because without all of us working together, we can't meet the needs of our most vulnerable students. Thank you. Oh, actually, I added this and these are what real parents are saying. So exceptional learners, my child's team has done an exceptional job of using technology to engage her in projects in new and creative ways. They've shared novel online games and activities, used video to introduce new exercises in PT, and invited her to share interests, images, and art remotely that she couldn't share in school. Being remote has given her extra flexibility in her day to better balance learning and movement. And as a result, she's moving more, losing weight, more engaged when she is learning, and generally experiencing less frustration and fewer meltdowns each week. These are students who have significant disabilities, and this is living in a remote world where you would think this would not be the optimal setting. Students have a better ability to learn at their own pace if they aren't available for learning during their therapy time. There isn't the constraint of only showing knowledge live during your 30 minutes of therapy a day a week, and on it goes. You'll get this, I'm sure, PowerPoint so you can look at them. I'm not going to read all of them, but I want to read the last one. My favorite positive has been actually knowing that about my child's education and being part of it. I hear that every week. Parents see their child learning, they're participating in it, they can carry out those activities because they're actually participating in it. So really powerful platform. So thank you.
Fern? Did we lose Fern?
No, she's there.
No, I'm here.
Oh.
I'm here. Now I'm trying to, I don't know why suddenly it's froze. Oh, there we go. So I just wanted to, I know we don't have a lot of time left, so I'm going to kind of cruise through this a little bit more quickly. Basically what I wanted to share was that, we started building what we think about as a system of care and learning supports. We started this building of this several years ago, like about 6 years ago. And so at this point, it was very timely that they had hired a coordinator for this, especially because facing remote learning, COVID-19, we knew that we're kind of, facing the impending mental health surge that would happen as a result of this increased isolation and so much uncertainty and change and all of that. So this summer, I think one of the things I was I'm most happy about having is this framework that was created by a really big group of educators across the district. Some parents were also parents in the district, and we're participating in creating like, what is the vision or framework or blueprint that we want to follow, and how will that then sort of help us navigate this time period. And these are the specific areas that we focused in on. This is kind of a summary. So no matter what, and we really wanted to make sure that these are principles that we want to apply to remote learning. So in the REAL program, these are principles we're applying as well. So we really started out the year making sure that we are all kind of on the same page. And we did a big push for training across the district to ensure that we started out with the same foundation and for people to understand. It's hard because I know, the fact is that where you were before COVID in terms of your system of care within a school and the culture of a system of care is sort of, that doesn't change because COVID hit. So you're still like, there were some schools where SEL was highly integrated all the way, very much integrated, and some hadn't. So to bring everybody on that even playing field, that's going to take time. But nevertheless, the whole idea that our district chose to focus on that and really hone in on these areas was really important. So I'm not going to read all these for them to manage time a little bit. This was the other part of it. And overall, it was keeping in mind, making sure that educators, administrators, our paras, every single person who's interacting with a student, a child, is understanding the critical importance this year of relationship building and helping children feel safe, seen, and secure and supported during the year. So this has been a helpful blueprint because especially as we move through the year, it takes on different meaning. I would say right now, a big focus for us are teachers and staff. They are hitting quite a wall. It's been a lot for them. They have done just the most remarkable work. Our teachers and paraeducators, our our student support teams, they're just doing such remarkable work and having to sort of address so many different changes along the way, and also feeling as time goes by, more and more of the weight of our student needs as they sort of face what it feels like to be in February and still be remote and still be separated from their peers, and facing those that ambiguous grief of sort of loss of different rituals and routines that they really miss. One teacher said, and I thought it captured it so well, here we are changing again, going through another change. It's like it's the first day all over again. And I think that's a huge pressure. So the idea that we have this kind of blueprint to go by, so now we're sort of pivoting and saying, let's focus on teachers and staff. And as we hit March, let's focus on transitions. Let's really like hone in on what we're going to need. So how do we do this? What the sort of like, what are we doing in order to support these things? We're trying to increase resources and bring and focus resources, both external resources, reaching out into the community, if we can find resources to bring to bear to help, and internal resources, making sure that people are really relying and leaning on one another for different kinds of supports and people who have different expertise in different areas. increase in communication. We've been really focused on that, making sure we're doing a lot more teaming and sharing of information, because I think we've always said in our system of care, like one of the biggest jobs is breaking down silos, because once you have good communication between helpers, between teachers, between remote teachers talking to each other. We have IPDPs and or professional learning teams who are getting together after school to share and talk and support each other to get through this, et cetera. You heard about book clubs, et cetera. We also have, we're trying to increase the knowledge, ability, and capacity to meet the social emotional needs of kids. So getting resources to people like I'm providing, for instance, Goal Book for counselors, because counselors can tap into Goal Book. There are so many resources in there that really support students with effective counseling supports for kids. So making sure like we just brought in Playworks, for remote teachers to use to practice social emotional skills in a different way with kids and getting them moving. So lots of support there. I think one of the biggest challenges of this time has been that it's hard to focus on process and relationships when the everyday tasks are really rule, when schools are caught up in contact tracing, and when you have 3 or 4 administrators and nurses and counselors doing contact tracing, that means they're not doing something else. So it is hard when task rules the day to keep our eyes on the prize, which is getting our work. I heard this phrase this summer, getting proximal to the pain, and really making sure that our system of care is getting to where we need to be. We've been using data such as definitely I've seen schools accessing different ways to reach out to kids, reporting who's kind of fallen through the cracks or who's not showing up. And I feel like our district has done a really good job with kind of reaching out to those kids in particular. And right now, a big focus is getting, more of those tier 1 supports for all kids and families. So this is our contact information. And at this point, just opening up to any questions. 429.
So feel free to unmute and just ask questions, or if you are more comfortable, you can type into the chat. Also, Fern, can you just stick Bill's contact information on there too?
Oh goodness, I can't believe.
So I guess I have a favor to ask you. If you could, I wrote down a lot of the resources and the purchases you made, and it would be really cool to get a list of those so that we could share it with some of the different people that have attended, and we can put it out there for others. I did have a question. Have you started to have conversations about how you will continue and integrate these efforts when folks are back in person? Like, what do you see it looking like?
So it's very interesting you asked that question. So we also have a couple other things happening going on. And one of them is we are part of an initiative through the DOE that's helping us look at redesign. And Bill has kind of got us in that, and we're starting that. And we also are part of the UDL network. So we have 8 teams rolling right now in the UDL network, which allows us to kind of have multiple teams meet with the same focus, with the same consultant that we work with, which is really good to implement change. So we started we're rolling the next couple of weeks with our UDL teams, kind of an online bucket. It's the best way I can describe it, that everyone's going to take good ideas and thoughts and things that have happened during COVID that are very positive, and we're going to start uploading and dumping good thoughts. Hey, we can continue to do this next year. Hey, we do that in one central team location. And then we're going to take a half day as a leadership team and with all of our UDL facilitators and kind of unpack that and say, now from this, how do we redesign? And along with that, with our efforts with our state committee, we're going to kind of combine those to to make kind of the future presentation of kind of the next task force going forward. And that's kind of the structure of it. Do we have the what yet? No, we have the structure of the how right now.
It occurs to me that and this occurred to me on a call earlier with a different school, parent communication and engagement will look totally different from now on, period. You know, just the office hours, the coffees, the online learning for parents, you know, all of that can be continued at a parent's convenience, you know? And so I feel like we've sort of like broken through, which I love.
And I'd say, Karen, too, another thing that's happened too, and I think all of us would agree on our team, is that it's okay to say we don't know now. And that permission has been liberating for, I think, a lot of educators. We're supposed to know everything and have all the answers and be able to figure out education. And the pandemic has really allowed that we don't know. This is new. We're going to figure that out. And I think that attitude of every year going into, this is new. It's a new year. We have new students in front of us. I don't have all the answers yet. You're going to have to be patient and wait till I figure it out, is a better message for schools than I have all the answers.
Mm-hmm. And yet you certainly did act quickly with the resources that you were given. I mean, that was sort of resounding for me, is that you made a lot of choices about a lot of purchases for organizational, for tools, materials, things that would facilitate success. And it was done very quickly, and you took your resources and applied them. And I think it's amazing, really. Kathleen.
Hi. First of all, hi, everyone. It's great to see you guys. And thank you for such a great presentation that was really informative. And I appreciated hearing that full, like, you guys got your stuff together. I like it. But I'm wondering, and this is if you found like the golden ticket, our fully remote classes are doing wonderfully. Actually, the families that elected fully remote are very, very strong and purposeful. And I think they're getting a high quality learning environment. Yet we are still struggling with our hybrid kiddos while at home and engagement. We are able to offer, you know, a very robust learning day with a mix of synchronous, asynchronous, the whole thing. And for tier 1, and even for some tier 2 and tier 3 kids, we almost have like a live person who's ready to help. But obviously you could be here by yourself. And if that family's not able to engage, you know, that's our problem. So I'm just wondering if you've discovered anything that might be able to help us with those families who are just not able to overcome the barriers that they're having their kids be able to log on. Heather.
Well, I have to be honest and say what we did is we started using a rubric that was designed by the special ed. So in this case, you're talking about all kinds of families, right? Situations. I will say in terms of special education, what we ended up doing is using a rubric that was designed in the special ed directors group around creating a system of bringing kids in for more time at school. So we actually repurposed some folks in our high school and middle school and even at the upper elementary for kids who were not attending, who were failing, and that we're actually creating times for them to come in. They may not go to the general ed classroom because we need to socially distance and keep the space, right? But we are bringing those students in more. I didn't talk about that. That's another whole piece of this for the hybrid school, was recognizing when a family, for example, you know, a single parent has 5 kids on IEPs, right? How does that actually play out? They could have 120 Zooms a week. So something's got to give. So bringing kids in that case, but we wanted to do it in a systematic way. And we've done the same thing with what we're calling highly at-risk kids, these kids you're talking about, kids who don't show up, who are not engaged anymore. And it's nobody's fault, it's COVID. So in those cases, trying to find pathways to bring kids in, whether it's one more day or a half day or 2 half days, or splitting those opposite days into 2 tiers. That's what I've done in all the school. We did that early in the fall. We started finding those kids and then gearing up to kids coming in at our high school, for example, and sitting in the library with a facilitator who is helping them go to their Zooms and be on time. So they're there. They're not actually getting specialized instruction or anything, but someone's helping them as their external, right, coach to make sure they're there, they're going to the stuff. So the truth is there's no, magic bullet here. It's they got to come to school more. And then that's the challenge of how do you balance that, and having that way of using some criteria becomes really important, because any parent could call and say, hey, wait, that's not right. I heard kids are coming into school. And then you start talking about why and who that is.
Yeah, Fred, Heather, I'd also say that you very smartly this year had every school have access to a social worker, and that role has been critical during this pandemic, because that person's been able to actually reach families, and even if the child wasn't coming in, they would coach them through getting on Zoom, building a rapport. So I think that's like one aspect that's been helpful.
And then the other, I would say, Kathy, is we use I would agree with Bill. So the social worker that became a component of this to support the family. The other piece was using constellations differently, like using BCBA support to actually, this you would never do in the traditional world, but we blew up school. So we actually sent them to homes to do environmental scans and assessments and help families set up the learning environment, help them use things like their Alexa to set timers throughout the day, so the student was getting into the calls and Zooms or whatever. Because if this isn't the world a parent knew, right? They've got kids at home at different levels. They may have multiple kids. So creating pathways that way. So creatively using your resources, whether it's a school count, whatever. But in this case, I was able to use the BCBA folks, which normally you wouldn't have them involved in other kinds of kids necessarily, but they really understand this stuff and can create routine, structure, consistency, which is what was missing. And then pathways to that, working with families and the resources they had. So in conjunction with the social worker, I had them work with families. So it was worth the additional cost to try to find a way to help structure that. And if we couldn't, we either pushed support into the home for a very small number of kids, or we brought those kids into school more, whether they had an IEP or not.
So what was important too, I'll just add, is that I've said it 1,000 times, it's 100 pieces to the puzzle. We don't have 120. We didn't add, we didn't increase our budget. We didn't go beyond our budget. We actually turned in multiple millions of dollars from last year in surplus that we didn't spend during going out for the end of the year. So it was really about, Heather talked about moving some other resources, but then we also didn't have as many in-school resources because they weren't needed. And we took a look at, and it was very, I talked about perseverance with the team and making some hard decisions that we had to say, if we do this and take this to fix this problem, well, we don't want to create another problem here. And sometimes we did. And we screwed up and we said, oh no, bring that back, because we moved too quick. And it was that kind of just balance of saying, here's the team, the school district became a much bigger team than a building. And we had to, during this, to really share those things, because they were in places they didn't need to be, and we needed them in other places, and that flexibility.
Thanks, John. It's a good way to think. Yeah. I hadn't thought a lot about that. I actually don't know too many schools that have successfully done that, sort of treated as systemically as the district. And so it's great to hear. Anything else? Any other questions or comments? I cannot thank you enough. I have learned a ton in the last hour or so. We will, this has been recorded, and we will clean it up and cut it up and make it lovely. It would be great to get that list of some of the major tech purchases that you made. Would love to hear that. And yeah, that's it. And we will, I'll send out a link and all of you can access the presentation and the resources. So thank you again.
Thank you.
It's been excellent collaborating.
Good to see you all.
Take
care.
Bye-bye.
Good to see you all. Have a great night.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you. Take good care.
Bye, Mac Crew. Thanks.
Bye.